Welcome to the Practice Podcast, conversations probing the nature of practice. I'm your host, Dave Fearon. This conversation with Dave, my son, which we had on a beautiful western Maine lake just a few days ago, and I miss it already, and I miss him already, is sort of like that Monty Python segue that they had in their original TV show called "And Now for Something Completely Different." And Dave and I would listen to that show, watch it, and chuckle. And how well did we know back then that we would be thinking alike now for something completely different, something both of us crave. This conversation will be different, and that's a good thing. And I want to have it represent a kind of practice that Dave has developed since childhood, and that is practice with a grounding and curiosity about what we call science fiction, and yet what I think he thinks of as other ways that the world and life and the mind could be working if we would open our minds and ponder it and consider it. So that aspect of the Practice Podcast is that there are probably countless people who have among their practices the pursuit of ideas that we call science fiction. Some of them actually write them and make movies about them, which I would love to see Dave do. But in regard to social inaction, which is where we land each time, he's giving us a more expanded version of what we started to hear in the last two episodes that Dave and I recorded. So with no further ado, but only to say, I'm real proud to have had this conversation where Dave grew up, and maybe someday I will too. Here is Dave Fearon Jr.
And we're on.
Welcome to another episode of the Practice Podcast, where I speak with my very smart son, Dave, about things that I know nothing at all, which is what the fun of this kind of conversation is. Well, I know something of it, but what I want to point out is that we are remote. We've gone remote to the wilds of Maine for this conversation. And I think it'll be kind of fun to see how it comes through in a beautiful setting, actually where we spent many years with the kids growing up in western Maine. So, Dave, take it away.
Well, I thought after our last podcast, we might try continuing the theme because there's a few loose ends. All of this in the context of the science fiction novel I may never get around to writing. But I think it's been an exercise in jumping around with the inaction model and taking it from one extreme, like what is the nature of quantum physics or the way the brain works, to the other, what's the nature of the universe, and whether, given that intelligence, as we've been explaining it, as evolved for human beings, it doesn't seem so complex that it couldn't happen countless times on other planets over the last billion or so years. What are the implications of having gotten to our level of advanced apes, able to use symbolic communication, but already getting into advanced extremes of what we can do with computers and computer minds and possibly artificial intelligence. Project that forward in the classic sci-fi scenario, but also one of that philosophers like to get into, and what can we do with it? We talked about some classic dilemmas from the beginnings of philosophy, which can be summarized as dualism or idealism, materialism, idealism. We've been talking about a material brain,
Yep.
and maybe explaining as much as we can down to the molecular level of how our brains could work, without having to propose that there's a magical idealist world that's really making it all work, and that we are mere projections of a greater energetic whole that underlying everything.
Mm-hmm.
But then we threw out the idea that maybe we are both, and that the other side of it, I'm proposing in my sci-fi conjecture, is that the a world of idealism and even the world of potential simulated aspects of the universe are a technology that's perhaps built into the fabric of the universe to solve particular problems. Those problems may be where we're coming up with right now in our lives as human beings, getting to the very limits of what symbolic voice communication is capable of in the minds that are able to do that, and what might be the next step beyond that if we needed to do convenient things like perhaps survive death or tap into shared knowledge, or really have a kind of a computer interface with artificial intelligence that doesn't in the process destroy our individuality as semi-biological beings. So is that enough context so far?
It is, and in an interesting way, because as I'm watching you across this little table and listening carefully, I'm also watching nature at work. I'm watching cat and nine tails outlined on a pretty lake, and I'm watching trees that have been standing for perhaps almost 100 years. The natural world, Dave, is that part of the technology you're thinking of, that even what we look out at right now could be transformed at some point?
Some might say, some in the extreme idealist camp would, or the extreme simulated universe camp would say, this is all just a somewhat cruel illusion. If we were to strip away the babbling brook that you might hear in the background,
yeah,
it is really just the equivalent of bits and bytes and digital information. Maybe it doesn't have to be digital per se, but it's just an illusion that our brain puts together, much like the Matrix movies have people take the red pill, the big wire comes out of the back of their heads, and they find themselves in a completely different world. I want to provide a middle way where
all right,
there may be something more to it, but that we need a natural world, and there's some very special things about the natural world that may be universal principles that are universal enough that they might explain something as complex as a universal mind.
Okay.
That some might call a god, but also how a complex universal mind, I think we touched on last time, isn't necessarily a simple one to propose either. The notion of omniscience, of omnibenevolence, in which there may still be fundamental principles such as entropy, where if you knew everything and knew everything there was that was going to occur, and were a complete expression of every atom in the universe, you either be the universe as a trivial fact, or you would have a mind that could decay into entropy and would not survive. So we kind of threw out some ideas last time about how the mind, for a universal mind to survive as a kind of a technology, it would need to be a mind made up of lots of parts.
Okay.
Which has been a theme we've been talking about with social inaction and even the brain.
Right.
Lots of people contributing by their actions to something that's a little more of a unified whole, layer upon layer upon layer. And we're proposing how high and how advanced might those layers go.
It's almost, I'm hearing, when you say people combining like that, it's almost like becoming an omni-practice. You know, everyone contributing, and as that happens, it's changing conditions from the ground up or from inside out. But it has a practice aspect, because practice is about doing. Practice is action in seek of being completed. So that force of pulling, in this case, parts like people together could be another way of looking at practice.
Yeah, we could think of it that way, because it is that recurring problem of how to deal with complex, random existence of things just happening, but all living systems have to meet that by doing performing self-organizing activities.
Yes.
That in the process create themselves, and also in the process we've talked about in the past, create observers in relation to that complexity and that chaos, and so part of that fitting things together are observers upon observers upon observers. So that's sort of what we're talking about.
Yeah, I get it.
So I thought we'd talk a little bit about some of the implications of, and another recapping of this idea of there having to have been a technology invented for beings to get beyond the physical limitations of a world much as we live in, where living systems will decay and die, and the mind with it. If on the one hand you had just a simple computer simulation, we talked a little bit about what sort of computers that would have to be. It wouldn't be a simple one like a more advanced type of computer chip like we have, because physicist von Neumann predicted that one would have to dismantle all the atoms in the universe to make enough computer chips out of matter to make that work within a relatively short amount of time, probably, which would have already happened. So we're just posing that there is some technology that we don't really know what it is, and we don't have to know for this discussion.
Okay.
It could be dark matter, it could be dark energy, it could be who knows what. But we want to pose, we also pose that in order for all these intelligent societies to have invented things on their own, they would eventually clash and fight to the point where probably there would just need to be one system that works very well. And once you have graduated into the capacity to live in such a system, there are rules, but rules. I was saying just not necessarily deeply involved rules, but mostly rules of such as playing nice with each other and not trying to destroy the whole universe and spoil it for everyone else. But part of those rules too are that too many rules becomes kind of another type of entropy. Entropy being defined as both energy and perhaps information that's no longer useful.
And it sort of floats away.
Yeah, it's a kind of death. So there's a real need for freedom. There's a real need even for free will. Yeah, I think.
Yeah,
it could be constrained, much as our free will is constrained by the needs of society and others, but it is fundamentally free. I think that the need to have free will and avoiding entropy, it does have this sense of balancing individuality with the collective, in increasingly sophisticated ways, but ways that do need to perhaps have some similar themes. Like there's a lot of good sci-fi written about the hive mind. Stephen Baxter has a nice series of books. He has a concept of the coalescence, where he kind of visions the various human communities, if they are isolated long enough, will become like individuated hives, where you have the reproductive bunch and the engineer bunch, but they become a kind of a devolution of intelligence in a way. They become almost useless in a sense for the capacity to evolve, because they kind of break down into the minimum energy needed to continue the hive.
I don't want that.
Yeah, so
scrap that idea.
Yeah, and maybe they'd be very advanced, and even ones that are competing with other sorts. So you can have, the hive-like insectoid race called the Trantyloids, who are battling the individual species from Zeta Reticuli or those kind of things. But I think more likely you'll find that there are paths to find that balance that are kind of there once you kind of graduate into those levels, and being able to find that balance of individuality and participation in the collective mind, which is what we do, I think, in our own lives and in the social world.
I don't think we have a sense of the collective mind.
Yeah.
As individuals, at least, carrying around a sense of the collective mind. But you look at it from a different lens, and you have a clear sense of a collective.
But a more complex, I think the inaction perspective is a very complex, it's a more subtle and involved notion of what collective is, because it is collective in effect without being collective in practice, in the sense that what we do in talk, for example, in talk and conversation, is a lot of work around acting as though I could read your mind.
Yes.
As though we had shared understanding, as though I could predict what you're doing, but it's mostly through my acting in a predictable way, and us focusing on that shared understanding, and then putting more of our energy into highlighting those differences and working those out, adjusting to what we don't mutually understand.
Yes.
And then topics of conversation can kind of flow along in that sense. So we're kind of thinking of that sense of something that it works as though it's a collective, and yet is still very clearly a matter of parts and individual entities working together.
Okay.
So one of the problems of working out something like a layer of beyond the social inaction in which one could live is that balancing of the hive mind versus the individual, and kind of working out through entropy. Another, though, I think principle might be this: there's still going to be that problem of needing to kind of defend the whole from threats, basically unknown threats. There's that sense of survival. There needs to be that survival of the interface in which these more advanced community type minds might exist. And I've been thinking that is probably one where you do have to kind of leave in quite a bit of room for bad actors, a need for that free will. You need groups that find more clever ways to attack and find fault with the whole, in order to make a better whole that is able to predict those kind of errors that would ultimately destroy everything. But always, of course, one step ahead of any of those nefarious plans succeeding. So I think there's a little bit of a correspondence there to why we allow for. We have lots of range of people who are more egotistic, more evil, more able to commit evil or be self-focused versus community-focused. You have to have that big range in order to have more degrees of freedom for maintaining the whole.
See, that is an unusual idea, to me at least, because an idealistic thinker would be, oh, well, when we reach this higher plane of existence, we'll have rid ourselves of all evil and all bad guys, and we'll all be singing Kumbaya or something. I don't know. But I get this notion that no matter how you visualize an evolving, maybe evolving isn't the right word, but an ascending kind of way of being, is that there has to be, in order for there to be freedom, we have to allow every aspect of life, including the way humans behave, have a space, if you will. You can't. The effort to continue to rid evil, which is what all of our history, all of our history, as well as our science fiction, seems to me to be exhausting. So we either need to have a good reason, like you're giving now, to say, okay, it's just going to be there. But here's the good news. It has to be in order for the effort to continue to better, to move into a more overall satisfying existence. That has to be there, because without that kind of tension, the aspect that we need to get better just won't. It just hangs. There's nothing pushing it, nothing.
It comes to that
motivating
entropy heat death, where all of a sudden there's it
so
grinds down to a halt.
In a way, the bad stuff increases the chances that we will survive entropy. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so. It helps kind of export it into something. But I think the notion of, if there's a notion of omnibenevolence, it's sort of that idea that the more advanced levels of community, layer upon layer, have already kind of seen most of the evil things, certainly that us, or maybe even societies 1,000 years in advance of us, can come up with. And we'll let them play it out as sort of a lesson internally. But then ultimately they'll say, okay, that's enough. and they kind of put an end to it, or kind of. I like the notion. Actually, the 18th century mystical philosopher Emanuel Swedenborg had an interesting notion, kind of inspired by his experiences in what could be described as an extended afterlife, after-death experience, communing with angels or who knows what. But whatever his experience, he had an interesting notion that hell, that if you died and went to hell, you're not going to a place. You're just kind of having some part of your personality that is capable of doing evil, or is really tied up in things like certain desires. You just have a place, and it kind of spins along and lives that life, but can never quite get out of it unless maybe they learn a lesson and do better. But so the idea of a simulated universe is there's simulated places to put entities that just don't quite want to play nice, and they can live out their life, but they're in a simulation, like an extended playpen.
I like it. I like it.
And perhaps they get tired of it after a while.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. So
a new definition of hell. I haven't heard that one.
Yeah, it it's a little more gentle than just making one mistake and
burning someone. And
for all eternity. That seems like a big waste. So, so another aspect that I've been fooling around with these ideas, what kind of communication would be possible if you were able to exist in a domain in which you're not limited to the speed and the other limitations of symbolic words. Let's say you could, if you wanted to know, if you met someone new, you might be able to almost instantly have a little encapsulation of what their life has been up until now.
Wow.
Summarized and indexed.
Wow.
And then go on from there. Or, or rather than, or had a really new idea, but were able to put it out there in all its permutations and emotional significance and everything else. So
without words,
or without at a great speed, but also one that still actually works as a type of communication. I think you'd still have to kind of look at, well, what are some of those basic principles of how our more limited brains would work? And I think there would still be some of those principles of an action I've been putting out, like largely the idea of prediction.
Mm-hmm.
That largely what we're trying to do is balance a prediction of the future with recollection of the past, but in which past is largely being recreated in relation to the future to give us a sense of present.
Yes,
I think you'd still would have to do that at some level, even if it's larger and extended and into vast capacities. We could even think about how we're almost there in a certain way with like our Google search.
How so?
Because, you could kind of think of that sense of being able to now say, well, I need a certain amount of knowledge about what happened when was the Civil War fought, and what was there a battle over here, and then you just ask your phone.
Yeah.
So the act of being able to reach out and have that kind of information much more instantaneously available.
Yeah.
In the course of an interaction is something that we didn't even have
10 years ago.
10 years ago.
No.
And
yeah. Wow.
So you kind of, so we could kind of think about, well, what are minds like if we don't even have to pick up a phone, but you're just kind of able to tap into something. So one idea I thought of, if this level of technology exists, then what is that tapping into something? Is there a need to record everything? To record all knowledge, to store it, or at least make some relevant subset of it available. And there's a lot of, and lots of the esoteric thinking, and even some religions have this notion of a record. That one of the most common terms is an Akashic record. Mm-hmm. That somehow everything is recorded, including ourselves, and sometimes it's applied to past lives for traditions or ideas that have this notion of reincarnation. That there's a need to store it. There's a need to kind of have that record, because it is all about learning, having a basis of learning and developing and coming up with novelty by knowing what's been done before.
Yes.
But I think if you really thought about what that is, it wouldn't just be a simple, static bunch of knowledge. It'd be a more dynamic knowledge, something that's needs to be indexed in a way that there would need to be sort of a librarian with patrons. You have to have a question, and that question, the way that question is asked, would have to dynamically reproduce what that past might be relevant to live in, almost like so that record of the past becomes almost like the simulated universe of running scenarios, even having a little bit of a predictive quality to it. Where otherwise you just find facts that have their own sort of entropy in our.
There would have to be, in a way, using my own words, but to a very elegant idea, but there would have to be a story quality.
Yeah.
In a sense. In order to have a record, the great record, capital R, that you're talking about, in order for it to move us emotionally as well as socially, I think it has to have the feeling that we get when we're listening to a story. I'm just imagining this now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you give me 4 or 5 facts, there's a cup, there's a plate. That's a cup and a plate.
Yeah.
But if you were to say, the last person who drank out of this cup fell over and died.
Yeah.
I would look into this cup and I'd go, oh God. But it's something about it. Maybe it's just I'm projecting human nature. I think we just need story. I don't know if other living beings need story, but I think in order for us to move into this realm of technology you're talking about, we can't just ask Google in a sense without having a reason to ask Google and some idea of how that connects to our story and our lives.
Because we know how Google likes to respond. It likes to sell us something related to our question, and that's
it's
become
true.
normal. But it's not.
It's true.
Maybe that's not the best solution if that's were to become universal.
You can refute my notion of story and move on.
No, I like it. I think it's true, and I think it's part of what we're talking about. Are there even this fantastical world of a universal mind? Are there basic correspondences to what we've been talking about how humans interact? So another side of that, in addition to kind of needing a much more rich ability to record the past, but still have that past as something that's shaped to the relevance of the immediate needs, would also be kind of a prediction, ability to predict. And I think there's a big debate about whether there is such a thing as time travel, whether the world is determined. There's a real future that determines the present. I think for our current discussion, we can propose that there is no ability to see the future, that there is a real now. Maybe it's a little fuzzy at the level of quantum or subquantum or this or that as to what the now is and how flexible time is. But I don't think, unless perhaps you gave it to the full universal mind, that any advanced aliens or whatnot are able to see the future or be from the future and interact with the past. It kind of, for various reasons, which I won't get into, I think you end up having to have only a simulated universe at that point.
I'm okay with that. I'm fine with that.
Okay.
I don't want to messing up a good future.
Given that,
I want to have it.
Yeah, so if you really couldn't predict the future, then it's really important to. I mean, if you can't actually know the future, predicting the future is very important, because otherwise you end up with all these situations that could become essentially that survival threat, even maybe for the whole universe. Because maybe there's other universes outside too that might get us, so you never know. Mm-hmm. But in any case, within the universe, you're trying to get to that state where you are trying to allow for threats, but also come up with better solutions that can overcome them once they emerge. So I kind of propose that in this technology that allows perhaps the mind to survive outside the limitations of biology, there's also a massive prediction engine. Same as there's a massive recording engine, there's a massive prediction engine.
Ooh, I like the sound of that.
Yeah, almost like, using about as much capacity as might be eked out of the subatomic whatever it is that this works in, using significant resources to predict what's going to happen next. And if this is necessary, then those entities that are going to be able to live in that world, advanced enough to live in that world, are going to be able to use that prediction engine.
Yes.
So they might live in a world that's highly predictable, but it's also one where I would say you kind of would have to balance your ability, the amount of prediction you either get to use or want to use, because if you were to predict everything that was going to happen next,
you'd end up not wanting to live.
Yeah, you're back in an entropy situation.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, you're just on
There's no more fun, no more excitement, no more surprise, nothing. Just
so if you thought of things like some of the reincarnation philosophies will say humans are born to Earth with a very little ability to predict what happens next, just to live in that much deeper novelty. But it's also very hard, and is what the Buddhists would call suffering.
Yeah.
But it'd be interesting then to kind of look at, well, what would the next level be? And I don't have much to say about it, but it would be one where, is there even a way that they could achieve a sort of language in which you have this tapping into an almost perfectly recorded past that is shared and flexible, but also a very deep prediction of the future, and converse with those abilities?
Oh my goodness!
It kind of gets
that makes my head hurt.
Yeah, it ought to. So I don't know how much we can say about it, but it's kind of.
I love. It sounds like a feeling of seeking. It's like, if we could reach that point where we have a perfect record of the past and a perfect record of the future, which of course would never be perfect, but it's certainly more than we have now.
Yeah.
The question is, what kind of human beings would we be?
Yeah, because you could almost see people kind of coming up with advanced AI and kind of living in that world to the extent where it starts to do that to some extent. Like the really, you almost see that. You hear like the kids who get so much into video games that they're just living their lives in video games.
Yeah,
which
it becomes their reality.
Which are a very programmed set of future activities and a recorded past, and it becomes. But I think their minds start to decay.
Oh yeah. Well, anything else they need to do with their minds is reduced, and so they can put more of their energy into playing the game. Yeah,
but that's sort of. It's just an interesting conjecture that we certainly don't have to solve here. But
I love the idea in terms of inaction. All of existence is actually moving in a direction. That's good news for me, because some nihilists say nothing is nothing and nothing, but I have that feeling of hopefulness in a way, hopefulness, because there's enough current evidence, like you just mentioned with AI, that we're figuring some things out and putting some things together that are moving us in a better direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but they could also...
Or kill us all.
Yeah, or kill us all. That's always what could go wrong. Luckily, we have lots of movies to give us, and books, sci-fi notions to kind of play those out. Yeah. But, I've also in that regard, if even a slightly advanced, civilization that we encounter, either they come here as in their UFOs, and the notion that they already have, or we meet them in the future, we may find that there's a fundamental level in which we cannot understand them, and they cannot understand us, and that needs to be overcome. Maybe
that's what you mean by communication of another kind?
Yeah. So for them to really be able to dial back their minds to get back to that little primitive thing level that we're at is similar to us trying to really live in the mind of an ant, or at best maybe our cats. I think we could do that okay, but we find if we really look at how we interact with cats, we're mostly anthropomorphizing them and thinking that they understand exactly what we want them to do.
That's right, which they don't care. Yeah. They don't care.
So
they're cats.
Yeah, so it's a fun challenge, and it's one that you'll hear talked about every now and then in the UFO podcasts and discussions, and even ones where reports of alien abductions where they've been taken up in the spaceship. There's intriguing ways that they describe how they're trying to meet that communication barrier that kind of made me think of some of those aspects that we're talking about here.
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't think we need to go too much beyond that, since we're roughly within our normal time. But I just wanted to add that to what we were talking about before. I think it's something that we can play with. One big question, of course, is what is the current relation of human beings to such a world? Are we now in any part attached to that potential technology in which we survive death? I'll leave it on a simple question. Or are we merely still evolving and have to keep working at it until we're at that privileged level?
Yeah.
Some of the things that make me suspect that perhaps we are at least being given at the perhaps a kindergarten level some aspect to that access is that all the reports of psychic phenomena, mind reading, then what we put together as a model of the brain does not easily support that mind reading beyond, very carefully, predicting what someone else is supposed to say. But there's lots and lots of instances and lots of very well done tests where people can know things that they could not possibly know.
Yeah.
About what someone else is thinking or doing, like holding up a card, and knowing what card they're seeing. And then you have literally hundreds of thousands of reports of people coming back from near death and reporting on very consistent things, and also knowledge that they cannot possibly have. You have thousands and thousands of reports of children being born who know very accurate things about someone else's life who's died, including going to that town and finding relatives and finding things on gravestones. And so it kind of suggests, well, maybe we do have some access to that. Maybe that's one of the reasons we get to evolve as far as we have, because we're being shepherded towards that membership in a wider community. And perhaps some of the rules of being part of that community are ones that are shared over and over, and many of the religious and esoteric philosophies and theologies in a confused way. But I think we could probably think of more than a few shared themes that might give us a clue that we are perhaps able to participate and grow as a species into that next level.
Well, that was great. And let me just give you my final thought. You mentioned earlier in the discussion of this notion that there seems to always be something happening to tear down or to block or somehow rule out what, in a nutshell, I call the progress you're describing. And in recent time, in our lifetime, you and I, we've enjoyed the science, we call it fictions, we enjoy speculating like you're doing right now, and yet there would be someone right next to us who might say, stop that, it's heresy, it's blah, 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 they throw all kinds of words at it, and it'd create a shame condition.
Yeah.
And I, for one, am on record right now saying, baloney, shame. I think this is the time. What better time to allow more of that kind of free thought and conversation around these other possibilities to flourish. As an institutional guy, though, I keep asking, where can we let this happen? We've closed down our colleges and universities to the extent that we can, certain things are no longer are not allowed to be discussed.
Yeah, if I were a professor, I probably wouldn't even think of these things.
No, or if you did and express them, someone would be on their phone reporting you to the dean. So, I'm not trying to trivialize all this because it's a very important conversation, but I think that there has to become, therefore, a group of us who are practitioners of the search for this new technology. It has to amount to people who are willing to risk doing, saying, doing, searching differently than the rank and file, if you will, or the people who have been relegated to a state of shame. Why not? I don't know who those practitioners are. Maybe they're you and me.
They're out there.
But they're out there, and perhaps they need to be talking with each other in a different way, not just always talking about we're on the fringe, but maybe the clock is running, and maybe the rest of us who think we're not on the fringe should express ourselves in a way that we say, okay, let's hear it. Let's hear it. I think that's what's going to transform us, letting these ideas come in and rummage around in there.
And also that we aren't alone, that there very likely would need to be representatives of these higher, more advanced communities of mind who would want us to succeed and need us to.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's another damn waste of carbon, and perhaps
they could roll over to another galaxy and find some more willing.
And their ability to reset and start over is itself rather concerning. Should things go really bad. Yeah. So
anyway, I'm emoting, but I think this is a very helpful step toward a bigger question of what is an action after all.
Yeah. And when then we'll return to a book that I'm in the middle of that in strange synchronicity is tying together everything that we've been preparing our talks about, but I hadn't read the book yet until now.
Well, that's confirmation, isn't it?
By Mark Solms, called The Hidden Spring, and he gets into some very interesting areas of the nature of consciousness, but very deeply back into neurobiology.
Great. So what's the name of that again?
The Hidden Spring by Mark Solms, Solms. But we'll talk about
that'll be the next, maybe the next installment if Dave reads it fairly soon, because we are on vacation. But I'm looking forward to it. And isn't it cool that you pick up a book and start reading it and start thinking, hey, wait a minute.
This ties together 40 years of things I've been thinking about.
Yeah.
And that we've been doing a whole bunch of podcasts.
Yeah. Now, how does that happen?
Yeah.
Is that not something beyond the normal?
There you go.
All right. Well, thanks, Dave, and look forward to our next conversation.
Thanks for listening to the Practice Podcast, where we discuss practice with a capital P. If you'd like to hear more, listen in on Spotify, Automatic, and Apple Podcasts, or go to enactionresearch.com/podcast-page. And if you'd like to learn more about social inaction and the nature of practice, head over to enactionresearch.com for more information. Thank you for supporting this show. We look forward to hearing from you soon.
Oh, and one more thing. How could I forget? The book on practice as a way of being is available now in digital form, something that would be new, like podcasting to many of us. And it's a great way of learning more and more about what this podcast presented when Peter Vale and I originated it several years ago. So please come to mylibrary.world/practice, and you'll see what I mean. Thank you.